Happy New Year, everyone! This is officially the first video of 2026, which means that I will be doing a reading recap of all of the books that I have read during 2025. Now, small disclaimer, my grandfather decided to light up the fireplace, so if you guys hear some noise in the background, it's probably it. And I also have my notes on this side, so if I stare at the ear, it's because of that reason, okay? All of this being said, let's go for the video. The first book I've read this year is 1984 by George Orwell. This is not the first book that I've ever read by this author. The first book I've read by him is actually Animal Farm, and I loved that book a lot because I just loved the way the author explored social themes and themes he wanted to criticize and talk about. So when I began reading 1984, I had a lot of expectations, and I have to say the author did not disappoint. Especially in his book, we are following the story of a main character that is in a totalitarian regime, okay? Sort of a dictatorship to extent, where the political party in power at this moment in the story of the book is essentially controlling pretty much, well, everything. So how can I begin talking about this story? I have the feeling that if I begin talking about things that I remember the most from the story, I will probably talk what I want to talk about. So in this story, we notice that at the beginning, the main character has went out to find a book to write in, sort of a diary, okay? And that we notice that at that moment, the sole idea and action of writing a diary is something that he is scared of. And during the rest of the book, we understand how much writing a diary is actually like crazy, because there is this thing called thought police going on, which is exactly what it sounds, because we have people trying to control information a lot, and existing a diary written by someone without the government checking what they are writing poses itself as a threat, because this government thrives a lot on the control of information. And we noticed that the main character began having that existential crisis, and that concerned the most because during his work he was reading some files and checking some files about some people that he remembered that they existed, because he not only read files about them, but he also saw them. And later in the story, years later, the government is like, yeah, that never happened. No, you are talking about that never existed. That's just some conspiracy theory. And the main character is like, I read the files. I saw them. What do you mean? And because of that, he started being paranoid and began writing a diary with things that he remembers. But that itself poses itself as a threat, okay, to the government. And this is just a small overview, because what happens a lot is that they are controlling information. And that's one of the reasons behind why I was so curious to read this book, because we are noticing that in this day and age, ironically enough, with text internet, there is still happening a lot of control of information, and whoever controls the information controls what people think, and who controls what people think controls people. People control people, people control humanity. And that's a scary reality. And another thing behind why I wanted to read this book so much is because, well, I'm in Portugal, I am Portuguese, my family is Portuguese, and 50 years ago in Portugal, there was a dictatorship that fortunately ended with the 25th of April revolution, that even though they still celebrate in Portugal, for a good reason, okay? But I am noticing that some people, young folk mostly, seem to be forgetting that, okay? Because everyone and their mothers, okay, everyone and their mothers is people that suffered with this dictatorship. All families have scars from it. And I already heard people from my generation saying things like, oh, dictatorship, the Estado Novo, was not that bad. And I was like, what do you mean? It was a dictatorship. People were going to jail for no reason at all. People were going to some of the most crazy things in their life for no reason at all. What do you mean it was not that bad? Everyone has family members that went to jail. And people are saying it wasn't that bad? Like, excuse me? And then I realized something that still annoys me, which is in Portugal, the history classes, they are not it, okay? And the ones that have it past high school are very rare. Most people in Portugal, as soon as they turn 15 and go to the high school, they no longer have history. I want to give you guys an image, okay? My mother has 4 children, okay? I, out of four of them, am the only one that had history past high school because I went for humanities with history, but 2 sisters of mine went to economy. They did not have history. My brother to biology, it did not have history. Out of 4 children, only one went to humanities, which ironically enough is the high school choice that, as it seems, people tend to develop the most. And ironically enough, the one where we have history and the one where we are actively studying and learning about human actions, about humans. And these are not meaning humans in the sense of biology and medicine, that's not the stuff human. I mean humans in the sense of what makes human being human, what are humanity creations, and what is human history. And now noticing this and noticing what some young folk are saying and the misinformation spreading mostly online, I have some serious concerns. Probably because I fully believe that it's highly related to the fact that we are witnessing a spread of the far-right political parties in Portugal and also in Europe, which is concerning. If you know history, you get concerned with this, okay? So this being said, please educate yourself. Please never stop reading. Please just learn about human history and human beings because it's scary, man. But this being said, this was one of the main reasons behind why I wanted to read this book so much, because so that also a friend of mine also recommended the book to me years ago, and I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a chance, and this year I finally read it. Now, the other book I've read this year is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke. This is essentially an exchange of letters between, Rainer Maria Rilke, and I think it was a student or someone asking her for advice on topic of arts. Essentially, consider this the conversation, the letters between someone interested in creating art and someone that creates art and is teaching people and giving advice. This is the whole story of the book, essentially. And I read this book a long time ago, and I feel like I have to reread it because I feel like I forgot some stuff. But what stood out to me the most was this idea of get in touch with yourself to create art. And I feel like this is more important now than ever because most of the people that choose to go with art as their career are now facing a situation where we are creating art not for ourselves, but to feed the capitalist system and what it wants at the moment. Okay? And that's okay concerning because human beings are no longer creating the art they want to see in the world, but the art the people with money want to see in the world. And I feel like that's where the problem lies, mostly. So if you are someone that's an artist, someone that creates art, whatever type it is, yes, create the art that will pay our bill because unfortunately we live in a world where we have to be concerned with these man-made concepts of money, for example. But please also create the art that you want to see in the world. I feel like that was my main take from this book and what I was thinking the most as I was reading it. Now, the other book I've read this year was Dopamine by Dr. Anna Lembke. I read this book where the author essentially talks about dopamine, how it works, and addiction, and how it works essentially, and why it happens, and what does it mean, and what's going on in our brains during these moments with addiction. And it is related to dopamine. And I found this book and want to read this book because it was highly recommended to understand what happened with dopamine. Because I have heard a lot of discourse during this year about doom scrolling and how so many people are getting addicted to being on their phone. And I was like, how does this happen? Despite what we witness outside, what is happening inside our minds and inside our body with these addictions? How is it happening? And I reached some, concerning conclusions. Well, for starters, we can start by saying that we live in a capitalistic system. I feel like I'll need to explain about that, but essentially that's part of the problem because the capitalism system wants more money. People want more money in their pockets, especially people who already have tons of money want more money. Okay, some human beings are really like that, and they will go after what's more valuable in the market. And what's more valuable in the market at this time and age is our attention. Because the longer they can keep us on our phones, the longer we are going to be exposed to products that they want to sell. And the more we are exposed, the more tempted we feel to buy them. And with that, sometimes the more we buy them. And that's one of the reasons behind why our dopamine is so fried now, because they literally want us spending more time in our phones. Okay? Because they can make more money from it, essentially. And industries, they are greedy like that, okay? And that's what I've concluded from my understanding of the situation. Essentially, with the progress we have made in understanding human nature, instead of using it to better ourselves, it is being explored to make more money. But actually, this is just my take from the book. The book doesn't necessarily talk about all of this. She talks about dopamine, how it works, how it happens with cases of addiction that she faced, and her clients. The word's not therapist. The word's not. Does it say here? Okay. She's a doctor. She worked within the field of psychology and things like that, and then she wrote a book and published it, explaining dopamine and addiction. That's it. Now, the other book I've read this year is Character and Neurosis by Claudio Naranjo. Essentially, this is another book of typology that I like to read because for those that follow me from TikTok, you guys probably can tell already that I'm a typology nerd. I'm a nerd in a lot of ways, but especially in typology, I've been obsessed with it for years now, so I like to read about and educate myself more on it. But essentially, for those that don't know what typology is a system where you can essentially understand, it's a pseudoscience, okay, pseudoscience, and we have different archetypes, and sometimes some of your personality traits essentially fit in some archetypes. And I found that this is an amazing way for you to better understand yourself. And in this book, Claudio Naranjo is exploring the topics of the passions that essentially each of types have, because we have nine types, okay? And each of these types has a main drive. It's essentially what motivates us the most as human beings, or what drives us the most. I'm not sure if I remember all of them, but we have 9 types. The type 1, if I'm not wrong, it's anger. The type 2, it's pride. Type 3 is vanity. The type 4, I really try my best to understand type 4, but I don't know. They're a type that's so hard for me to understand. And I don't think I remember. Sorry. I'm gonna leave it in the screen right here, in the screen. Why it is that one. Type 5 is greed. Type 6 it's fear. Type 7 it's gluttony. Type 8 is lust. Yes, that's type 8. So these are the main drives, and they are not drives in the sense of what you probably think it is, okay? It's small, different from what we usually have as a concept. For example, type 1's anger is not this explosive person that's just like being blah blah blah, blah all the moment. That's actually more type 8's, my humble opinion. I'm not sorry for that, type 8's. You know that you are like that, okay? The type 1's anger is more directed at themselves and to perfect themselves. Okay? So they are actually quite well composed, in the sense of, I would say that it's sometimes quite hard to actually take a genuine, non-perfectly crafted emotional suppression out of them, because they are like, I found that a lot of type 1s, especially self-preservating ones, I get this feeling that they often spend an insane amount of time thinking about what the most ethically correct way to react to some situation is, and they at that moment they essentially just react according to what they think they should act like. Crazy. And for example, type 5's greed is not this, I want all these things for myself. It's more in a sense of them being too close upon themselves emotionally and not giving themselves emotionally to themselves. In a nutshell, that's it. It's that person that you probably find that's a lot away from society, that person that's close on themselves and don't really interact much with people because they are scared that they will get too drained from them and then have no energy for themselves. That's great in type 5, for example. Okay, it has different interpretations depending on the type. The other book I read this year is 27 Personajes en Busca del Ser. My Spanish is not the best when speaking, so I'm profoundly sorry if I uttered some atrocity. But in a nutshell, this book is also about the Enneagram, which is the typology system I mentioned before. And each of the types I said before, the 1, the 9, 2, all the way to the 8. The 9, oh my god, I forgot the 9. The 9 is slot, by the way. I remember that one because I made a mistake in my comments. One time in a post and I said lazy. It's slot. I'm so sorry. That memory haunts me still. But anyways, each of those 9 types as a subtype. So we have type 1 and we have self-preservating 1, social 1, and SX1. So in total we have 25 other types, and this goes more into detail exploring each of the institutional variants of self-preservation, social, and SX1. Okay, so that's it. It's more detailed about each of the types. The other book is The Syntax of Love by Alexander. Yeah, I'm not going to say the last name because I feel that if I try to say his name, I am going to utter atrocities beyond human comprehension, and I am not sure if I want to do that to myself, not to anyone. Yeah, no, not really. This is another book about typology, but not the Enneagram like I said before. This is a book about the psychosophy, also referred to as attitudinal psych. This system essentially categorizes people based on 4 major aspects and how they essentially prioritize it and value that. And based on that, what archetype they fit. Those 4 aspects are logics, emotion, volition, and physics. In a small overview, logics is essentially the mental activity, interact with intellectual activities, understanding things, and those types of logic. This is like, I feel like this is too abstract, but the name really says what it is, okay? Then we have emotions, and it's emotional state, your emotional state, other people emotional states, how you value, how it acts up, how it, what they said, how it acts up, okay? Then we also have physics, which is just material stuff, yes, your body, your space, all of these things that habit the physical realm, essentially, and how you act towards it and how you prioritize it. And then we have the last one that, in my humble opinion, is probably one of the aspects that it's more important for you to be aware of. That is essentially volition. Volition is, in a nutshell, not, I won't say your self-esteem, but the core of yourself, okay? How confident are you in you are, and how essentially does that manifest itself in the rest of your life and your personality? Because from what I have understood about typology and what I have gathered during these 4 years of being interested in it, is that depending on your volition type, your relationship with all the other aspects of most types, honestly, might be different, okay? And might be more or less confident. For example, if you have volition in the first, in third position, and physics in the 1, naturally, being physics in the 1, you would be a lot more comfortable with money in your body, accommodating stuff. But having volition in third position, even though you are like very secure in that, you can either depend insanely only on that, and the other 2 functions. No, wait, I'm saying something wrong. You might still be that as abundance and make sort of abuse of it, of that position, okay? You might be, let's just say, I know, maybe perhaps more aggressive or a lot more possessive with your stuff, sometimes being to the point of sometimes explaining it to people also. And you might also relate a lot on your second position, for example, logics. You might skim a lot and then insanely on that. to get things done because you are so insecure in your core self that everything else about your life is doomed because you yourself feel like you are doomed, and instead of realizing that you are just drowning in misery and you are just going with it on and on again until your evident demise, okay? This is just a small review of how important it is, okay, in my humble opinion, because this, even though you don't like typology, I would advise you to understand how your evolution is, because it is actually that relevant for you to grow as a person, understand yourself better, because understanding your relation to who you are and your identity and all of that is so important to grow. Just go check it out. It's really curious, actually. Now, the other book I've read is The Telltale Art by Edgar Allan Poe. I have to say, this is the first book by Edgar Allan Poe that I have read. I really want to get into his writing, actually. And I was surprised because I got this book and I thought it was like all the stories in this book were just Telltale Heart. But no, it is actually, this book adds more stories. Let me check if I can tell which ones it also adds. Yes, it has Telltale Heart, The Fall of the Usher House, and The Cask of Amontillado. Surprisingly enough, the Telltale Art is only 9 pages. I was like, for real? I was actually surprised. And essentially, Telltale Art follows the story of a man that essentially murders someone and then is hunted by the heartbeat of the person he killed, and sort of going insane about that. Just amazing. I find that I have never read anything by Allan Poe, but I was actually pretty much curious about the story. So I read, and I have zero regrets, really. Just interesting story. The other book I've read this year is Journeys Out of the Body by Robert Monroe. So how can I explain this book? I have always been curious about spirituality and witchcraft. Okay, so I like to educate myself about it. And in this book, Robert Monroe is talking about experience of the body, in this case specifically astral projecting, which is something that I've been really curious about. And he essentially begins by telling the story. He had how can I say this? He had a out-of-body experience, and he was like, what just happened? So he then started to sort of fight his fear and investigate it more, and he had a couple of experiences, and he began documenting them and sort of understanding what had happened, details about it, things about it. And from what I have gathered about spiritual community, this is probably one of the best books about astral project not there, because it is just the experience of someone that had one of like, okay, let's investigate this. It's pretty much curious. If you are someone that practices witchcraft or is interested in spirituality, I would recommend you this book. Okay, it's pretty much a curious read, and it's pretty much really interesting, actually. Just go check it out if you're interested in any of the things. Now, the other book I read this year is Only Dull People Are Brilliant at Breakfast by Oscar Wilde. And how can I describe this book? A friend of mine described this book as being the Twitter of Oscar Wilde, and that is facts. Okay, that's the best way I have described this book. This is essentially just a compilation of random quotes that Oscar Wilde said, and they are just in his book, and the story is being told. And I had such a great time reading this because Oscar Wilde he has pretty much interesting humor. I would dare say if he was alive in his day and age, he would definitely have loved Twitter. And I don't know, I feel like he would love the humor of this generation, really. Now, the next book I've read this year is The Vegetarian by Anna Kuang. And I'm not even sure how I can talk about this book because I am still processing it. I've read this book, I think, 2 months after becoming vegetarian, and it reawakened a lot of traumas I had with eating meat and all that. Because in this book, we are following the story of our main character, and she suddenly decides to become vegetarian, okay? And during the story, it is never being told from my point of view. It is being told from the point of view of her husband, her sister, and the husband of her sister, okay? And we are witnessing how dehumanized people become in some people's point of view when they stop eating meat. And it pains me a lot because it's crazy. Because when you distance yourself from the violence that comes from eating meat, people suddenly seem like, I don't know, seems like they tell that you are going crazy, something like that, which is just insane, in my opinion. And how can I even talk about these topics by myself? Because I'm not really sure I'm still in a position where I can talk about this book because too much stuff happened in the story and I'm still processing it, okay? And I've read this months ago. But yeah, it's crazy. It's social critique. It's of how people perceive vegetarians and what it means to distance yourself from violence and from eating something that was once alive and no longer want to do it, and how society perceives you. I feel like that's the main focus. How when you try to do something that goes outside the norm, usual for ethical reasons and their own moral compass, and society doesn't have the same moral compass, how they just perceive you and treat you, which is just crazy to me. Because I remember being young, and I think I first attempted to go vegetarian when I was, I think, let me think how long ago it was. I think I was like 12, 13 years old at the time. And I was like, I am eating animals. I I like animals. Why am I eating them? And then I started going to an existential crisis. So at the school I was in at the time a military school, just for balance of it all. I was like, yeah, I don't wanna eat meat. Can I put a vegetarian option? Which they did not have, ironically enough. Um I didn't eat meat for like 3 days upon the options, but at some point my parents caught up with the fact that I was not eating meat, that I wanted to go vegetarian, and they forced me to go back to eating meat again. And I still, every time I think about that, I'm like, why do some parents always think it's a phase? Especially with things like this, but this once again is like the topic of the book, okay? They just think people are going insane, some temporary insane thing, okay? But I felt that on my skin. I was probably 12 or 13 being like having this existential crisis, not wanting to eat meat, and I was forced, literally forced to eat it. And it pains me a lot, but I dealt with it and I kept eating meat for the couple of years after that. And then now I am 22 and I have stopped eating meat. I think before I turned 21, okay? And honestly, I have no regrets. But the sad thing is, now that I am educating myself more about it, I am noticing where the idea that people need to eat tons of meat came from. Because people often will tell you that, oh, back in the days, human beings were hunters. They were hunting meat and eating meat. And I'm like, hey, here's a fun fact about that. Not all hunts were successful, which implies that people needed to have other things to eat. Which implies then that some people actually focused a lot on planting stuff so that when one hunting went bad, they still had something to eat on the table. Human beings in the past did not eat as much meat as we eat today. And ironically enough, we only keep feeding this idea because there has grown a whole industry around the topic of selling meat, okay? And as you know, when capitalism finds something and it becomes a business, people want to still have customers, they want to have consumers, so they will push this propaganda, this agenda. And people will fall for it and then reproduce these ideas that come after. It's just, that's honestly pretty much messed up. But yeah, these were my thoughts on the vegetarian. This topic of capitalism, I find it's often explored somehow in here because there is this one scene where they are having a dinner and the husband is going there with the wife, and it tells them that, oh, my wife is vegetarian. And as he says that, is like, there is gonna be a tension from that moment on. And they try to justify it like, oh, so she's trying to lose weight. She's trying to get skinny. Okay, I understand. Of course, I mean, it's temporary. Can you imagine if someone just didn't want meat just because they deem meat as being ethically wrong or morally wrong, as if we were morally wrong or ethically wrong? Yeah, that was sin. And I find that a lot of what happens sometimes. People say, this person is going vegetarian because they want to lose weight. And I feel that this obsession with losing weight comes from one propaganda too, and capitalism too, because they want us to be all similar and equal because it's easier to sell us stuff to some extent. But yeah, these are just some of my thoughts on the book. I might be going off scripted because I only pointed the books harder in here, and everything else I'm just going off script and talking about whatever pops in my head at the moment. But these are some of my thoughts. In the future, I might actually read this book and make an analysis of it, a long analysis of it, okay? So these are just some of my thoughts on this. Now, the other book I've read this year is Babel by Kuang. And I have to say, this is one of the most important and relevant books out there. Especially in the story, we are following the story of Robin and his friends. Robin was Chinese and he was taken by Lavelle to England for him in order to study and then join the university where they were working with silver bars. Silver bars are essentially these. This has fantasy aspect to it, okay? They are bars that people that work with translation can often change, not change the word, but can use the bars to different meanings that often give monetary value after, okay? And that's why they need people from other countries so that they can go there and work with silver bars and then bring money to the country. Also, while at the same time, the kingdom is exploring other countries. Especially this book talks about topics such as colonization, racism, and capitalism. And that's why I think it is so important. And I say this as someone that's Portuguese, okay? And being interested in history, it is impossible to deny the damage done by the Portuguese people in history, okay? Because I remember being in class and listening to things being said that were along the lines of, oh, the Portuguese, when they went to Brazil, they colonized the country, they brought knowledge, they brought religion, they built the roads, they brought tons of wonderful things. The people there, they evolved because of the Portuguese that went there and brought all of this. And I was not in class. I was like, okay, that's it. Then I went home and I went to study. And I study not only from the notebooks of class, I study from documentaries. Documentaries from Portugal, documentaries from Brazil, documentaries from the United States, documentaries from the United Kingdom, documentaries from France, from Italy, whatever. As long as it has like subtitles in Portuguese or English, or even Spanish sometimes, I can understand it. And here's the thing. By studying from these sources from other countries, also from books, I was like, that's not what happened there. What happened was completely inhuman. They made so many atrocities that it's profoundly messed up. But in classes, that's not what they are telling us. They are telling us something completely different. And people say, oh, but it was not a time period. It was different. It was acceptable, understandable. Well, we are not in that time right now. We can call things by their names, okay? So we can realize it was messed up, and we should say that it was messed up, not painting it through these color-colored lenses or whatever they want to say. It was not that. And that's important to say because in this book, that topic is explored, okay? That topic, we understand just how insane prejudices are and racism is, okay? Because I want to talk about it because I try my best to understand all types of prejudice because I am queer, okay? And the only prejudices I faced was the ones that I went through from being someone that was queer and also someone that was socialized as a woman, okay? Those are the only prejudices I felt in my skin. But growing up before understanding that I was queer, I was always being told, oh, those queer people, those odd folks, those anomalies in society, those sinners, there's always something wrong about them. They're just not. Let's just say I grew up in an environment that was pretty much messed up. And was pretty much, there was a lot of homophobia there, okay? And when I realized I was queer, I began to be like, is there something wrong with me? And then I educate myself and I was like, no, but they are telling me that there is something wrong with me. And then I had I had this moment of, I am queer. They spent my entire life telling me that queer people were this, but I am queer and I am not this. What is going on? And then I began to be like, okay, let's check where this is coming from. And though I would need to say that there is no logical reason for homophobia. There is no logical reason for racism. There is no logical reason for misogyny. There is no logical reason for 90.9% of paradise in the world. And this is one of the reasons behind why I want to recommend this book, because I know I yapped a lot in this book, okay? But this is a really necessary book, probably one of the most important books written in the last couple of years, in my humble opinion. So go check it out. It's seriously an amazing book. Okay, I just realized that this video is getting way too long, so I will record the video in 2 parts and post it the week after this one. So I will talk about one more book and then just record a part 2. The other book I have read this year is actually not a book but a manga, but I personally count reading manga as reading, so this is what it is. And it was the guy she was interested in wasn't a guy at all, and this is such a wholesome story, okay? Because we are following the story of our 2 main characters, and one of them goes to, I think it was a city shop, and there she meets someone and falls in love. So she goes to school and is like, oh my god, I met the cutest guy on the shop yesterday. And well, as it turns out, it wasn't a guy, it was actually one of her colleagues that was sitting next to her in class. And the other girl was like, I beg your finest pardon. And then the story moves on forward from that. It was just an awesome story, a really, actually sweet one. I might read the volume 2 next and then search if there have been more updates on the story. But seriously, it's if you are searching for something more humor-like and queer to read, just go check that book. It's pretty much interesting. Now, this video is getting way too long, so I will need to record a part 2 in the future and probably will post it the week after this one is already being published. So if you've read any of these books, please let me know your thoughts on it and what I think about them. And if you want to read them, also let me know. I like to know what people are reading and interested in. So I hope you guys like this video. I am probably going to start recording more literature-related videos for the channel because I love reading, I love books and all of that. So yeah, that's it. Till next video, guys.